Gregory Caldwell adjusted his Armani cufflinks and leaned toward Bethany Sharp, his voice carrying that particular tone of someone who believed the world owed him an audience. You know what's wrong with flying commercial these days? He didn't wait for her response. Standards. They let anyone on board now. Absolutely anyone. Bethany Sharp. Her phone already angled for the perfect first-class selfie, nodded absently. I know, right. Last week I was on a flight with someone who literally smelled like... The sentence died as a figure moved past them down the narrow aisle. Simone Vaughn walked with the kind of economy that comes from years of moving through tight spaces under pressure. Her faded gray hoodie hung loose on her frame. The canvas duffel bag over her shoulder, sun-bleached fraying at one corner, swung forward as she navigated between the leather seats of first class. The bag's corner brushed Caldwell's armrest. He recoiled as if struck, yanking his arm back with theatrical disgust. "Excuse me? Excuse me?" Simone's eyes never left the path ahead. Row 6, row 7, 8, 9, 10. Her lips moved, silently counting. "Did you just..." Caldwell stood blocking the aisle. "Do you have any idea how much this suit costs?" She stopped. For one moment her gaze met his calm brown eyes that gave away nothing, then continued past him like water flowing around stone. "Unbelievable," Caldwell muttered loud enough for the surrounding rows. "Seat 12B, that's where they put the 'help, sweetie, not the passengers.'" Laughter rippled through first class. Bethany's phone captured it all, her thumb already composing the caption. Simone reached row 12 and paused. Middle seat. The worst seat on any aircraft. She lifted her bag into the overhead compartment, with both hands' movements precise despite the worn clothes. No wasted motion, no fumbling. She sat down and immediately looked up, not at the passengers, but at the ceiling panels. Her eyes tracked something invisible, counting again. Then forward, scanning the exit row markers. 13 rows behind, 12 rows ahead. The boarding door sealed with its familiar pneumatic hiss. The engines began their rising whine. Through the window, ground crew in reflective vests gave their final signals. Caldwell settled back into his leather seat, accepting a pre-departure champagne from the flight attendant. He raised the glass toward Bethany with a smirk. 45 minutes to Boston, he said. Let's hope she doesn't cause any trouble. In seat 12B, Simone Vaughn looked exactly like someone the world had taught to become invisible. The gray hoodie had been washed so many times the fabric pilled at the elbows. Her jeans bore ancient paint stains, white spatter near the left knee dried and permanent. The canvas bag tucked under the seat ahead showed its age in frayed seams and faded patches where logos once lived. But her boots told a different story. Tactical boots, black, barely scuffed, the kind with reinforced toe boxes and slip-resistant soles designed for running on tarmac. Not fashionable, functional. Nobody looked at her feet. The woman in 12A middle-aged pearls, already reading her Kindle, had noticed something else. When Simone reached for the seatbelt, her right hand trembled. Just slightly. A fine tremor that lasted 2 seconds before her fingers closed around the buckle. The woman in 12A shifted closer to the window, putting an extra inch between them. Simone's hands moved through the seatbelt with unusual deliberation. She didn't simply click it shut. She pulled the lap belt tight, then tighter, adjusting the angle across her hips. Her fingers traced an invisible pattern, left hip, right hip between, as if checking for straps that weren't there, as if she expected 5 points of contact instead of 2. The tremor appeared again when she cinched the belt one final time, pulling until it pressed firm against her stomach. The woman in 12A glanced over, then quickly away. Simone's eyes moved methodically through the cabin. Not the nervous scanning of an anxious flyer, but something else. Systematic. She counted the rows behind her lips, moving without sound. 13. Her gaze shifted forward. 12. She looked up at the ceiling, tracking the line of overhead bins toward the emergency exit lights, green signs glowing at rows 1 and 25. She noted their position, their brightness, the clear pathway to each. From her bag, she pulled something unexpected, a small paperback with a tattered blue cover pages, dog-eared and annotated. The title read in block letters, FAA Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge. She opened it to a bookmarked section. Chapter 16, Emergency Procedures. 5 rows ahead, Trevor Hamilton shifted in his seat. The retired commercial pilot had been trying to nap, but something made him look back through the gap between seats. He caught sight of the manual in her hands. His mouth curved into a smile, the kind reserved for people who didn't know they were the joke. He leaned toward Caldwell across the aisle, voice low but carrying. "Great," Hamilton muttered, just loud enough. "Another wannabe pilot reading the manual like it's a novel. Probably thinks she can land a plane after watching YouTube." Caldwell's laugh was sharp and immediate. Simone's eyes never left the page. Her right hand rested on the armrest fingers, drumming a pattern only she could hear. 1, 2, 3. Pause. 1, 2, 3. Outside the window, JFK's taxiways blurred past. The 737's engines climbed from idle to takeoff thrust. And Simone Vaughn kept reading about hydraulic failures, her trembling hand steady enough to turn the page. The 737 climbed through 20,000 feet, banking gently northeast toward Boston. Through the speakers, Captain Michael Torres's voice carried the practice calm of 15,000 hours. "Folks, this is your captain. We're expecting some moderate turbulence as we pass through 25,000 feet. There's a frontal system sitting over Pennsylvania that we'll need to navigate around. Flight attendants, let's go ahead and suspend cabin service for now." Simone's hand moved to her wrist before she consciously registered the announcement. She checked her watch, a reflex so automatic she didn't realize she was doing it. The digital display read 14:22 local time. Her eyes unfocused slightly, calculating something invisible to everyone around her. Fuel burn rate at this altitude, time to cruise, estimated time en route. The woman in 12A noticed the gesture and frowned. Who checks their watch during a turbulence announcement? 3 rows ahead, Marcus Hollis jabbed the call button with aggressive precision. When Paige Scott appeared, her professional smile already strained, he gestured dramatically at the seat in front of him. "I paid $200 extra for this seat, extra legroom right. But this person..." He pointed vaguely backward, somehow implicating Simone, despite her being 5 rows behind him. "These economy passengers think they can just recline into my space whenever they want." Paige's voice remained steady. "Sir, that's actually seat 9B, and they're within their right to... I don't care about rights. I care about what I paid for." His eyes swept past Paige, landing on Simone with the particular disdain some people reserve for anyone they deem beneath consideration. Maybe if people dressed appropriately, they'd understand airplane etiquette. Paige's jaw tightened, but she kept her composure. "I'll speak with them, sir." In first class, Bethany Sharp had already positioned her phone for maximum lighting. Her voice took on that bright artificial quality reserved for social media performance. "Y'all, I'm literally on this flight to Boston right now, and..." She panned the camera toward the back of the plane, though the galley wall blocked any actual view. "Economy is absolutely wild today. Like I'm talking people who look like they just came from... I don't even know where. This is why I always fly first-class people. Standards matter." The first jolt of turbulence hit without warning. The aircraft dropped 5 feet in a heartbeat, that stomach-lifting sensation that makes experienced flyers grip their armrests and nervous ones gasp. Coffee cups rattled. Bethany's phone slipped in her hand, the live stream briefly showing the ceiling. Simone's response was different. Her hands moved to the armrest, but not with panic. Her fingers positioned themselves at specific points, index and middle fingers, together thumb providing counter pressure. the grip of someone who'd experienced far worse than clear air turbulence. Her breathing never changed. 4 counts in through the nose, 7 counts hold, 8 counts out through slightly parted lips. The woman in 12A clutched her Kindle like a lifeline, knuckles white. Simone's lips moved barely audible beneath the engine noise. 340 heading. Clear air turbulence. About 18,000 now. The woman in 12A heard it turned slightly. Was this person talking to herself? Another bump lighter this time. The seatbelt sign dinged on overhead, unnecessary, as it had never gone off. Simone's eyes tracked upward again, not in fear but in assessment. She was counting something, timing something. Her fingers tapped against the armrest in that same rhythm. 1, 2, 3. Pause. 1, 2, 3. In first class, Trevor Hamilton shifted his sleep mask up, irritated by the turbulence. Through the gap between seats, he caught another glimpse of the woman in the gray hoodie, that manual still open in her lap. He shook his head and muttered to no one in particular, "Unbelievable." The turbulence subsided as the aircraft climbed above the weather layer. The seatbelt sign remained on, but passengers began to relax. Some returned to their books. Others closed their eyes. Simone reached into her duffel bag movements, careful and deliberate. She was looking for the ibuprofen she'd packed the headache had started during boarding pressure building behind her temples. The kind that came from too little sleep and too much stress. Her fingers found the pill bottle. As she pulled it out, something else shifted in the bag. A metallic flash, brief, unmistakable, caught the overhead reading light. Dog tags. They swung once on their chain, before Simone's left hand moved with surprising speed, pushing them back down into the bag's interior. But not before the stamped letters caught the light for half a second. Von East, O+, USAF. In seat, 14A, Master Sergeant Harold Peterson's eyes locked onto that flash of metal. His hand stopped halfway to his own reading material. 65 years old, retired Army, 28 years of service that had taught him to notice things other people missed. He'd seen those tags before. Not Simone specifically, but thousands like them. The way they hung, the weight of them, the way people who'd worn them for years touched them without thinking. He didn't say anything. Not yet. Simone extracted the ibuprofen and opened the bottle. She shook out 2 pills into her palm, closed the bottle, then did something that made Peterson lean forward slightly. She tilted her head back at exactly 45 degrees. Not the casual backward tilt of someone taking medicine. A precise angle head position to let pills slide down the throat with minimal motion. The technique pilots used at altitude to prevent vertigo to keep their spatial orientation when inner ear pressure played tricks. She swallowed once cleanly, then brought her head forward in a single smooth motion. Peterson's wife Margaret noticed his intensity. "Harold, what is it?" He kept his voice low, barely above a whisper. "That woman in 12B. Watch how she breathes." Margaret looked. At first she saw nothing unusual. Just a tired-looking woman in old clothes, eyes closed, resting. Then she noticed it. The breathing wasn't random. It followed a pattern. Rhythmic. Controlled. 4 counts and Margaret could see her chest expand. Hold. 7 seconds, maybe 8. Then a slow, measured exhale that took even longer. "What about it?" Margaret whispered back. "That's aviator breathing," Peterson said. "Box breathing with an extended exhale. You do it to stay calm under G-forces, to keep blood flowing to your brain during maneuvers." He paused. "I've only seen it in pilots." Something else caught his attention, a glimpse of Simone's wrist as she returned the pill bottle to her bag. A watch. Not a fitness tracker or a fashion statement, but a black G-Shock with multiple subdials. The kind with built-in altimeter and barometer. Military grade. "Harold," Margaret warned, sensing where his thoughts were going. I'm not saying anything," he replied quietly. "Yet. But that woman moves like someone who's spent time in a cockpit. Watch her eyes. She's not looking at anything random. She's doing threat assessment. As if to prove his point, Simone's eyes opened and immediately tracked to the emergency exit sign at row 25, then forward to row 1, then up to the ceiling panels where the oxygen masks were stored. Counting. Always counting. Peterson settled back in his seat, but his attention never left her. The 737 leveled off at 23,000 feet, still climbing toward its cruising altitude of 35,000. For most passengers, this was the boring part of flight, the long, uneventful stretch where nothing happened. Then the aircraft shuddered. Not turbulence, something else. A vibration that came from within the structure itself, like a guitar string plucked too hard. The cabin lights flickered, once a momentary brownout that lasted less than a second, but enough to make people look up from their phones. Simone sat forward, her attention locked on the ceiling. In the cockpit, First Officer Evan Brooks frowned at his instrument panel. He was 28, 3 years out of regional airlines, still proving himself on every flight. "Captain," he said, his voice carefully neutral, "I'm seeing intermittent master caution. Hydraulic quantity is fluctuating on System A." Captain Torres glanced at the hydraulic synoptic display. The needle wavered between normal and low, then settled back to normal. "Probably just sensor noise. We had that write-up last week. Maintenance couldn't replicate it." "Copy." Brooks didn't sound convinced, but he was the first officer. Torres had the experience. The PA system clicked on. Torres's voice filled the cabin. Folks were experiencing some unexpected turbulence. Flight attendants, please take your seats for now. But Paige Scott, standing near row 8, knew the difference between a turbulence call and a caution call. That tone in Torres's voice, the slight tightness, she'd heard it before. Something was wrong, even if passengers couldn't tell. Gregory Caldwell had no such insight. He unbuckled his seatbelt and stood ignoring the announcement entirely. He had questions, and questions demanded answers from people he deemed subordinate. He walked down the aisle toward economy, his Italian leather shoes silent on the carpet. When he reached row 10, he stopped and raised his voice, not quite shouting, but loud enough to carry. "Excuse me, is anyone else concerned that the turbulence started right after certain passengers boarded, heads turned? Conversation stopped." Caldwell gestured vaguely backward toward Simone's row. "I'm just saying, we had a perfectly smooth flight until—" He let the sentence hang, the implication clear. Bethany Sharp's phone was already recording. She'd angled it to catch Caldwell's performance, her voice dropping to that conspiratorial whisper that felt intimate despite being broadcast to 3,000 followers. "Guys, this turbulence is literally insane. And there's this weird lady a few rows back who's like creepily calm. I don't know, bad vibes. Something feels off about her." The camera panned, trying to catch Simone through the seats. Simone didn't look up. She'd opened the pilot's handbook again, this time to Chapter 8, Hydraulic System Failures. Her finger traced the diagram showing dual hydraulic systems on commercial aircraft System A, System B, and how they provided redundancy. She was reading about failure modes when Trevor Hamilton appeared beside her row. He'd unbuckled too ostensibly to use the lavatory, but really because he'd seen that handbook again and couldn't let it go. Pride mixed with 40 years of commercial flying made him stop. "Honey," he said, looking down at her book, "that's a little advanced for casual reading. You need a license to even understand that stuff. Hell, you need years of training." Simone looked up. For the first time since boarding, she made direct eye contact with someone who'd challenged her. Her brown eyes were calm, unflinching, carrying something that made Hamilton unconsciously step back. "I know," she said simply. Then she returned to reading. The simplicity of it, the lack of defensiveness, the complete absence of need to explain or justify irritated him more than any argument could have. "Oh, so you're a pilot now." Hamilton's voice carried mockery and disbelief in equal measure. What airline Spirit Frontier? He smiled at his own joke. Or maybe one of those YouTube flight simulator channels. Is that where you got your training? Simone turned the page without answering. The woman in 12A shifted uncomfortably, caught between wanting to defend someone and not wanting to get involved. She chose silence. Hamilton waited 5 more seconds for a response that never came, then muttered something under his breath about wannabes and fantasies before continuing toward the lavatory. Bethany caught it all on camera, her commentary running, "Y'all, this retired pilot just called out the weird lady, and she literally has nothing to say. I'm telling you, something is off." Marcus Hollis leaned across the aisle, speaking loud enough for several rows to hear. Some people watch a documentary and think they're experts. Probably never even been in a cockpit. Simone's right hand moved to her wrist again, checking the time. 14:47. 25 minutes since departure? Her fingers resumed their tapping pattern on the armrest. 1, 2, 3, pause. 1, 2, 3. In seat 14A, Harold Peterson watched everything, his jaw tight. He'd served with people like Simone, people who didn't waste energy defending themselves because they knew what they were. And he'd served with people like Caldwell and Hamilton, people whose confidence came from never being truly tested. The aircraft shuddered again, harder this time. Nobody was laughing anymore. The second shudder was unmistakable. Not turbulence, not weather, something mechanical deep in the aircraft's structure, like a joint slipping out of alignment. Captain Torres keyed the PA. Folks were going to be making a precautionary diversion to Philadelphia. Nothing to be alarmed about, just some weather ahead that we'd rather go around. Expect a slightly longer flight time. His voice was calm, practiced, but Evan Brooks could hear the lie in it. They weren't diverting because of weather. "Captain," Brooks said quietly, eyes locked on the hydraulic panel. "System of pressure just dropped to 1800 psi. That's below minimum." Torres's hand moved to the system selector. "Switch to System B primary. I'm taking manual control." He disengaged the autopilot with a firm press. The yoke came alive in his hands, heavier than it should be. The aircraft responded sluggishly to his inputs, not dangerously, but noticeably, like steering a car with low-power steering fluid. "System B is holding," Brooks reported. 2800 psi stable for now." Torres nodded, but his jaw was tight. His left hand moved to his chest, pressing against his sternum. Not now, he thought. Not now. "Evan," he said, his voice strained, "I don't—" The words died as his hand clenched into a fist against his chest. Pain radiated down his left arm, sharp and undeniable. His vision tunneled. "Captain—" Brooks's voice sharpened. "Captain Torres." Torres slumped forward against his harness, his hands sliding off the yoke. His breathing came in shallow gasps. "Captain." Brooks grabbed the yoke with both hands, stabilizing the aircraft. Page, medical emergency in the cockpit." The cockpit door flew open. Paige Scott took one look at Torres, and her training overrode her fear. She grabbed the oxygen mask from behind his seat, pressed it to his face. "He's not breathing right," she said, her voice tight but controlled. "We need a doctor. Now." Brooks's hand trembled as he reached for the PA. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a medical emergency. If there is a doctor on board, please identify yourself immediately and come to the front of the aircraft." Dr. Catherine Reed was out of her seat before the announcement finished. She pushed through the curtain, separating first class from the cockpit, her medical bag already in hand. One look at Torres, and she didn't waste time with questions. "Cardiac event? Possible MI? Get him flat carefully." Brooks helped ease Torres out of the captain's seat, while Catherine checked his pulse, his pupils. "He's conscious, but in shock. I need to start an IV." Brooks's mind raced. They were at 23,000 feet, 45 minutes from Philadelphia, and he'd just lost his captain. He was a competent first officer, but he'd never landed with hydraulic failures. never dealt with a true emergency as pilot in command. He reached for the PA again, his voice cracking despite his efforts to control it. We also need, if there is anyone with pilot experience, any pilot experience, please come forward immediately. Trevor Hamilton was unbuckling before the words fully registered. Thank God, he thought. Finally, someone who needs me. He strode toward the cockpit with the confidence of 20,000 hours, 40 years of flying 737s. Retired or not, he knew these aircraft inside and out. Gregory Caldwell practically applauded. Finally, someone qualified. Behind them, Simone Vaughn stood up. She moved into the aisle without hesitation, without announcement, her worn duffel bag left behind. Just clean, purposeful movement toward the front of the aircraft. Marcus Hollis saw her first. He stepped directly into her path, his bulk blocking the narrow aisle. "Where do you think you're going?" Simone's voice was quiet, steady. "I need to get to the cockpit." Hollis laughed a sharp, disbelieving bark. "Yeah, right. Sit down before you get yourself arrested for interference." Bethany Sharp's phone came up immediately, recording. "Y'all, this woman is literally trying to go to the cockpit during an emergency. This is insane. Security." Simone tried to step around him. Hollis shifted, maintaining the blockade. Paige Scott appeared from the cockpit, her face pale but professional. "Ma'am, please return to your seat unless you have legitimate pilot credentials." "I do," Simone said simply. Caldwell materialized beside Hollis, forming a wall of entitled obstruction. "Show us your license, then, right now. Or are you just another fraud trying to get attention during a crisis?" Simone's right hand went to her pocket, then stopped. The hand trembled just slightly, visible to everyone watching. She had no license to show them. Not anymore. The credentials were suspended pending recertification she'd never pursued. The dog tags in her bag would prove military service, but not current qualification. And explaining would take time they didn't have. Her hand dropped. Without a word, she turned and walked back to row 12. The crowd seemed to exhale collectively. Crisis averted. They'd stopped the crazy woman from endangering everyone. Bethany's live stream commentary filled the silence. "Oh my God, did you see that she couldn't even produce a license? Can you imagine if we'd let her into the cockpit?" In seat 12B, Simone sat down. Her jaw was tight, but her expression remained neutral. She picked up the pilot's handbook again, opening to the page she'd been reading. Trevor Hamilton disappeared into the cockpit. 30 seconds later, his voice drifted out through the open door, uncertain, shaken. "This is... Evan, this is a 737 MAX. I flew the classic series. The systems are completely different. This fly-by-wire architecture, I've never..." Brooks's voice rose desperate. "Can you help me or not?" A pause. Then Hamilton, stripped of all his earlier confidence, I don't know this system. I don't know what half these displays mean." The cabin went very, very quiet. Evan Brooks's voice over the PA had lost all pretense of calm. Raw fear had replaced professional composure. "Ladies and gentlemen, I need to be completely honest with you about our situation." Every conversation stopped. Every phone lowered. Even Bethany Sharp's live stream went silent. "We have lost hydraulic system A entirely. System B is currently operating at 40% pressure and continuing to drop. We are now in what's called manual reversion mode, which means I have very limited control authority over the aircraft." In the cockpit, Brooks stared at the flight control display. The words L10 law glowed in amber alternate law, the 737's way of saying the computers had given up trying to make the aircraft easy to fly. Hamilton stood uselessly to the side, his face ashen. Manual reversion means no autopilot, no autothrottle, no hydraulic assist for the control surfaces. It's like, "I know what it means." Brooks cut him off. "It means I'm physically wrestling with every input. It means this aircraft is fighting me." He keyed the PA again. "I need someone who has experience with fly-by-wire failures under degraded hydraulics. If there is anyone on board with that specific experience, please identify yourself now." Hamilton shook his head slowly. "My aircraft had cable and pulley controls. When we lost hydraulics, we still had mechanical linkage. This is completely different. These control surfaces are electrically actuated, and if the computers are an alternate law—" He trailed off, recognizing his own inadequacy. Brooks pulled up the fuel display. His stomach dropped. 4,200 pounds remaining. Catherine Reed looked up from where she was monitoring Torres. "Is that bad?" "That's enough for one approach to Philadelphia," Brooks said. "Maybe two if we're lucky, and I fly it perfectly. But in manual reversion, my fuel consumption is higher. And if I have to go around, if the first landing attempt fails—" He didn't finish the sentence. The radio crackled. "United 739, Boston Center. Be advised, Boston Logan is now below minimums due to snow. Recommend immediate divert to Philadelphia or JFK." Brooks keyed the mic. "Center 739. We're already diverting Philadelphia. Request priority handling." 739 Roger. Philadelphia is 80 miles on your current heading. Be advised they're reporting freezing rain. Runway 27 right is the only one open, 9,500 feet available. Braking action reported as medium. Medium braking action on a contaminated runway with no hydraulic boost for the brakes. Brooks's training told him exactly what that meant. Longer stopping distance potential for hydroplaning, increased risk of runway excursion. Center 739, we'll take it. Be advised we're single pilot operation due to medical emergency and we're in alternate law with degraded hydraulics. A pause on the frequency. Then, 739 understand. Emergency equipment will be standing by. You have priority for straight-in approach, runway 27 right. Brooks checked his navigation display. 80 miles. At their current speed of 280 knots, that was 17 minutes. But he'd need to slow down for approach configuration. Call it 25 minutes until touchdown. 25 minutes to figure out how to land a partially disabled aircraft in freezing rain with no captain, no qualified backup, and fuel for exactly one attempt. The hydraulic quantity gauge for System B ticked down. 2600 psi, still dropping. The rate of pressure loss. Brooks said to no one in particular, means we'll hit critical minimums right around the outer marker. Once I lower the landing gear, that'll consume most of what's left. After that, Hamilton finished the thought, after that you're committed. No go around. You either make the landing or don't say it. Brooks interrupted. In the cabin, passengers had heard enough to understand. This wasn't a routine diversion. This was a genuine emergency. And the only person in the cockpit was a 28-year-old first officer who'd never faced anything like this. One approach, one chance, no margin for error. Simone Vaughn watched the flight attendants moving through the cabin with controlled urgency. Their faces showed the truth they were trying to hide, fear barely contained. Paige Scott was checking seat belts in rows 8 through 10, her movements mechanical automatic. When she reached row 12, Simone stood and stepped into the aisle blocking her path. "I need to tell the first officer something," Simone said quietly. Paige's professional mask cracked. "Ma'am, please. Not now. I can't—" "He's flying through the icing level." Simone's voice was calm, factual. "Between 10,000 and 12,000 feet. At his current altitude and temperature, he's accumulating ice on the wings and engines. Tell him to descend to 8,000 feet immediately and reduce speed to 210 knots. Paige stared at her. "How could you possibly—" "The temperature outside is -8 Celsius. At 23,000 feet, that puts him directly in the supercooled water droplet layer. Every minute he stays there, he's adding weight and disrupting airflow. He'll lose engine power, maybe both engines." Simone's eyes were intense, urgent. Tell him now. Something in that tone, the absolute certainty, the technical precision made Paige move. She ran to the cockpit. Brooks barely glanced up from his instruments. Paige, I told you. Sir, a passenger said you're flying through the icing level. She said you need to descend to 8,000 feet now. Brooks's first instinct was to dismiss it. Passenger advice during an emergency was the last thing he needed. But his eyes flicked to the outside air temperature gauge. -8 Celsius. His altitude, 23,000 feet. His mind did the calculation, and his blood went cold. She was right. He was flying directly through the worst possible altitude for ice accumulation. The engine anti-ice system was on, but with degraded hydraulics, it wasn't operating at full capacity. He pulled up the engine instruments, and there it was. N1 on the left engine had dropped 0.5%, almost imperceptible, but the beginning of ice buildup. Shit, he breathed. He keyed the radio. Center 739 requesting immediate descent to 8,000 due to icing. 739 descend and maintain 8,000. Reduce speed as required. Brooks pushed the yoke forward simultaneously, pulling the throttles back. The aircraft pitched down, descending at 1,500 feet per minute. He watched the temperature gauge climb as they dropped -8, -6, -4. At 11,000 feet, they punched through the icing layer. The engine N1 stabilized immediately. At 8,000 feet, Brooks leveled off. The outside air temperature read +2 Celsius, above freezing. No more ice accumulation. He sat back, his hands shaking on the yoke. That passenger, whoever she was, had just prevented an engine flameout. Possibly both engines. He reached for the PA. To the passenger who recommended the altitude change. His voice was unsteady. Thank you. That information may have just saved this aircraft. In first class, Gregory Caldwell frowned. Lucky guess. Anyone with a weather app could... That wasn't a guess, Hamilton interrupted quietly. He'd returned to his seat, face still pale. That was someone who knows icing procedures, who understands critical altitude bands. He paused. That was a pilot. Caldwell waved dismissively. Then why didn't she show us a license? No one had an answer. In row 12B, Simone had already sat back down. Her handbook was open again, but she wasn't reading. She was listening to the engines, monitoring the sound, the vibration, the feel of the aircraft descending through the atmosphere. 20 minutes to Philadelphia. And something else was wrong. She could feel it. The sound came without warning. Bang! A percussion that rattled the entire right side of the aircraft, sharp, violent, like a cannon firing inside the fuselage. Then a grinding vibration metal against metal, followed by an abrupt drop in engine noise. The right engine number 2, was dying. In the cockpit, alarms erupted. Master warning lights blazed red. The engine instrument display showed N1 dropping rapidly, 70%, 60, 50, 40. Compressor stall, Brooks shouted. Engine 2 is... The engine gave one final shudder, then the N1 gauge hit 0. Complete flameout. Brooks's hands flew across the overhead panel, securing the failed engine, preventing fire. His voice over the PA was no longer professional. It was raw fear, unfiltered. We have lost engine number 2. We are now on single-engine operation. All passengers brace positions. Heads down, stay down. This is not a drill. The cabin erupted. Screams. Children crying. Bethany Sharp's live stream captured her own panic. We're going down. Oh my God, we're going to crash. The aircraft yawed hard to the right, the dead engine creating massive asymmetric thrust. Brooks fought the rudder pedals, his right leg burning with effort as he struggled to keep the nose pointed forward. In the cockpit, Trevor Hamilton stood frozen, his face drained of all color. He'd never trained for this, never imagined this. His 20,000 hours meant nothing right now. Brooks's voice cracked as he looked at the retired pilot. Can you help me with this? Can you fly single engine on alternate law? Hamilton's mouth opened. Closed. No words came. Then get out of my seat, Brooks said, his voice breaking. Hamilton stumbled backward out of the cockpit, emerging into the cabin like a ghost. Passengers stared at him, the man they'd trusted, the qualified pilot who was supposed to save them, and saw only defeat. Brooks keyed the PA one more time, desperation bleeding through every word. If there is anyone on this aircraft with military pilot experience, especially fly-by-wire systems or single-engine operations, please identify yourself immediately. This is life or death. Simone Vaughn was out of her seat before the announcement finished. She moved into the aisle, her movements deliberate, despite the aircraft's erratic motion. Every step purposeful. No hesitation. Gregory Caldwell materialized in front of her like a wall of expensive fabric and misplaced authority. You again? His voice carried disbelief and rage in equal measure. Do you have a death wish? Simone's voice was quiet, but something in it had changed, a hardness that hadn't been there before. Get out of my way. Show me your credentials right now or I'm calling the air marshal. Caldwell pulled out his phone as if that meant something at 20,000 feet with one engine. Simone tried to step around him. Marcus Hollis grabbed her shoulder, his grip tight enough to hurt. Sit your ass down before you kill us all. Simone's right hand came up to remove his grip, and it trembled. Not from fear, from something older, something physical. The injury that had ended her flying career the first time, the nerve damage from the ejection seat malfunction that had left her with a permanent tremor under stress. Bethany Sharp's camera caught it all zooming in. Look, she's shaking. She can't even stand straight. The evidence seemed damning. A woman in worn clothes with trembling hands claiming to be a pilot. It looked like exactly what they'd feared, someone desperate for attention, dangerously delusional. She's going to kill us, someone shouted from row 15. Master Sergeant Harold Peterson rose from his seat. Not quickly, not dramatically, but with the kind of authority that came from 28 years of service and zero tolerance for bullshit. Let her go. His voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Now! Hollis turned. Who the hell are you? Someone who recognizes a pilot when I see one. Peterson's eyes locked on Hollis. Let her go. Something in Peterson's bearing, the way he stood, the absolute certainty in his voice, made Hollis's grip loosen. Simone pulled free and ran. She reached the cockpit as Page opened the door. Inside, Evan Brooks was fighting the aircraft with both hands, sweat pouring down his face, his legs shaking from the effort of holding rudder. He looked up at Simone. This woman in a faded hoodie and old jeans, her right hand still trembling slightly, and his expression showed everything he felt. Desperation, hope, doubt. Are you serious? Simone didn't answer with words. She slid into the captain's seat, her eyes already scanning the instrument panel. Hydraulic pressure system. A dead system B at 900 psi and dropping. Engine 2 offline. Fuel 3, 100 pounds. Her hands moved to the controls. The right hand steadied the moment it touched the yoke muscle memory, overriding nerve damage. Brooks stared at her. Who are you? Simone's eyes never left the instruments. Right now, I'm the only chance you have. The fuel display ticked down. 3,080 pounds. Distance to Philadelphia, 42 miles. Single engine descent rate, 800 feet per minute. Altitude, 8,000 feet. Simone's mind calculated instantly, 42 miles at 210 knots, Steeks 12 minutes. 8,000 feet to 800 FPM descent, Steeks 10 minutes. No margin, no backup, no second chances. Simone Vaughn's hands settled on the yoke with the kind of certainty that comes from 10,000 hours of muscle memory. The tremor in her right hand vanished the moment her fingers wrapped around the control column. The Boeing 737 was yawing hard to the right, the dead engine creating asymmetric thrust that wanted to spin them into a graveyard spiral. Every second, Brooks had been fighting it, burning fuel and altitude just to maintain heading. Simone's left hand moved to the rudder trim wheel without looking. 3 clicks left. The yaw reduced by half. "You can ease off the rudder," she said, her voice calm, almost conversational. "Let the trim do the work." Brooks hesitated, then slowly reduced pressure on his right rudder pedal. The aircraft held course. His legs stopped shaking from exhaustion. "How did you—" "Asymmetric thrust compensation," Simone said, already moving to the next problem. Her eyes scanned the engine instruments, the hydraulic panel, the fuel quantity, the distance to Philadelphia. She was building a mental picture, assembling the puzzle pieces of a degraded aircraft into something manageable. "Single-engine descent rate at this weight is 800 feet per minute," she said. "We're at 8,000 feet. That gives us 10 minutes of altitude. Philadelphia is 42 miles. At 210 knots, that's 12 minutes." She looked at Brooks directly. "We don't have enough altitude to make the approach at this descent rate." Brooks felt his chest tighten. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we need to extend our glide, reduce power to minimum single-engine thrust, increase our speed to 220, and trade altitude for distance. We'll arrive at the outer marker with about 1,500 feet, just enough to configure for landing." Brooks stared at her. The math was perfect. The solution was textbook if you knew single-engine emergency procedures, but it required absolute precision, no margin for error. He stopped himself. "That's exactly right." Simone's hand moved to the throttle, reducing power on the remaining engine. The descent rate increased to 1,200 feet per minute, but their ground speed picked up. The aircraft was gliding now, trading altitude for distance with ruthless efficiency. "Set flaps 5, she said. Brooks reached for the flap lever. Flaps 5 set. The aircraft's nose pitched up slightly as the leading edge devices extended. Simone compensated, immediately lowering the nose to maintain speed. "Hydraulic system B is at 700 psi. Brooks reported, watching the gauge drop in real time. "If we lose it before landing—" "We won't." Simone's voice carried absolute certainty. "We'll configure late. Gear down at 2 miles final. Full flaps at 1 mile. Minimum hydraulic consumption until we're committed." She keyed the radio, her voice shifting into the clipped, precise cadence of someone who'd spent years talking to air traffic control under pressure. "Philadelphia approach United 739, heavy single-engine emergency. Request vectors for straight-in approach, runway 27 right. We have limited maneuvering capability." The controller's voice came back, immediately stripped of all routine pleasantries. 739, heavy Philadelphia approach, radar contact, fly heading 270. Descend pilot's discretion. You're cleared for the approach, no other traffic. Save fuel and souls on board. 739, heavy 3,000 pounds, fuel 189 souls. Simone's eyes never left the instruments as she spoke. "Be advised we're in alternate law with degraded hydraulics. We'll need the full runway length and emergency equipment standing by." "Copy all 739. Equipment is rolling now. Winds 240 at 15, gusting 22. Runway 27, right braking action. Medium visibility 3 miles in light freezing rain." Simone processed the information instantly. Crosswind from the left 15 knots, steady gusts to 22. Contaminated runway. Limited braking. She'd landed in worse, but never in an aircraft this heavy, with this many lives depending on her. Brooks watched her hands move across the panel with practiced efficiency, making small adjustments that kept them on profile. No wasted motion. No hesitation. "Who trained you?" he asked quietly. Simone's eyes flicked to him briefly, then back to the instruments. Someone who believed I could do this. It wasn't an answer, but it was all she was giving. The radio crackled with a new voice. Not Philadelphia approach, but something else. A military frequency bleeding through. Aircraft declaring emergency on approach to Philadelphia. Say call sign for authentication. Brooks frowned. Why would military be... Simone's jaw tightened. She'd known this was coming. The moment she keyed the mic, with that particular cadence, that specific phraseology, someone would recognize it. She reached for the radio, then hesitated. Once she answered this, there was no going back. 739 Philadelphia. We need you to authenticate with the military frequency. They're requesting confirmation of pilot credentials. Brooks looked at Simone. Confusion and suspicion mixing on his face. What's going on? Behind them, Paige Scott had been watching from the cockpit door. She'd heard enough to know this wasn't standard procedure. Military authentication in the middle of a civilian emergency. Simone keyed the radio, her voice dropping to a register Brooks hadn't heard before. Lower, harder, military. Authentication, Alpha 7 Whiskey 21. Call sign Viper. Silence on the frequency. Then Viper 21. This is Blackjack Actual. Authenticate receiver Bravo 339er. Oh, Simone closed her eyes for a fraction of a second. They were using her old authentication codes. Codes that shouldn't still be active. Codes that meant someone somewhere still had her file flagged. Bravo 339er confirmed. Viper 21 is current and qualified. She paused, then added, Tell Commander Richardson I'm busy right now. A hint of amusement in the response. Copy that, Viper. Good luck. Blackjack Actual out. Brooks stared at her, his mouth slightly open. Viper 21. That's a fighter pilot call sign. Simone didn't respond, her attention already back on the approach, but Paige had heard everything. She stepped back from the cockpit, her mind racing. Military call sign, authentication codes, fighter pilot. In the first-class cabin, Harold Peterson sat forward in his seat. He'd been listening to the exchange over his wife's airline app, which streamed ATC communications. His suspicions were confirmed. He unbuckled and made his way to where Bethany Sharp was still live-streaming her phone, capturing her own panic. "Excuse me," Peterson said quietly. "You need to see something." Bethany looked up, annoyed at the interruption. "I'm kind of in the middle." Peterson held up his phone, the ATC stream playing. Simone's voice clear and unmistakable. Call sign Viper 21. "That woman you've been mocking," Peterson said, his voice, carrying to the surrounding rows, just authenticated with military codes. "That means she's not some random passenger. That means she's exactly what I thought she was." Gregory Caldwell, hearing this from his seat, scoffed. "Military codes don't mean she can fly a commercial airliner. They're completely different." "Actually," Trevor Hamilton said quietly from across the aisle. His earlier confidence replaced with something else, recognition perhaps, or shame. Fighter pilots train on the hardest aircraft to fly. If she's authenticated with a call sign, it means she's not just military. It means she's combat qualified. Marcus Hollis shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but her hand was shaking. We all saw it. Peterson's response was soft but carried steel. Combat injury. Probably saved her life once. Doesn't mean she can't fly. In the cockpit, Simone adjusted their heading, compensating for the crosswind that was pushing them left, of course. Her right hand held steady on the yoke, the tremor completely gone when she was focused. Brooks watched her reassessing everything he'd assumed. "How many hours do you have?" "Enough," Simone said simply. "In 737s? "No." She glanced at him. "But I've landed a C-17 with 3 engines out and no hydraulics. The physics are the same. Heavy aircraft, degraded systems, one chance to get it right." Brooks felt a chill run down his spine. "When was that?" 2 years ago. Mediterranean. Classified." She turned back to the instruments. 26 miles to touchdown. Time to focus." The radio crackled again, but this time it wasn't air traffic control. It was a voice with the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. United 739, heavy. This is Commander Dan Richardson McGuire Air Force Base. We've authenticated your pilot in command as Lieutenant Colonel Simone Vaughn, call sign Viper 21, confirming she holds type ratings on C-17 F-35 and multi-engine transport aircraft. Your pilot is qualified. The transmission was on the frequency every aircraft monitoring Philadelphia approach could hear, including United 739's cabin, where dozens of passengers were listening through their airline apps. Evan Brooks's eyes went wide. Lieutenant Colonel, Simone's jaw tightened. Former, I'm retired. Retired from what? Test pilot, Air Force Research Lab, before that combat. Her hands never stopped moving, making micro-corrections to their descent profile. Can we focus on not dying right now? In the cabin, Harold Peterson allowed himself a small, grim smile. He'd been right. Not just a pilot, a test pilot. Someone who'd flown experimental aircraft pushed the edges of what was possible. But the validation from McGuire AFB didn't satisfy everyone. Gregory Caldwell unbuckled again, ignoring the turbulence and the seatbelt sign. He pushed his way toward the cockpit, his face red with indignation. I demand to speak with someone in authority. He announced to Paige Scott, who blocked his path. I don't care what some military radio says. That woman has been acting suspicious this entire flight. She has no visible credentials. She was in economy class. She's flying the plane, Paige said, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. She's the reason we're not in a death spiral right now. She could be anyone. Do you know how easy it is to fake a military call sign? I'm a lawyer. I know about identity fraud. Behind Caldwell, other first-class passengers were murmuring. The seed of doubt had been planted, and fear made it grow. Trevor Hamilton, to his credit, stood up and faced Caldwell. I was wrong about her, he said loud enough for multiple rows to hear. But you need to sit down and let her work. That radio authentication was real. The military doesn't joke about that. Oh, and now you're an expert. Bethany Sharp's live stream swung toward Hamilton. 5 minutes ago, you said she was dangerous. Hamilton's face colored, but he held his ground. 5 minutes ago, I was an idiot. And if we survive this, I'll spend the rest of my life apologizing. But right now, she's the only qualified person in that cockpit. In the cockpit itself, Simone was dealing with a new problem. The freezing rain that Philadelphia had warned about was accumulating on the windscreen faster than the defroster could clear it. Visibility was degrading rapidly. Brooks, can you bring up the HUD? She asked, referring to the heads-up display that projected flight information onto the windscreen. We don't have HUD on this aircraft, Brooks said. Only the newer MAX 10s have it. Simone's lips pressed into a thin line. Then we're doing this on instruments alone. Call out altitude and airspeed every 500 feet. I need you to be my eyes on the numbers while I fly attitude. Copy. Brooks's voice was steadier now, finding confidence in having a clear role. Altitude 7,200 descending, airspeed 220, 18 miles to outer marker. The Philadelphia controller came back on frequency, 739, heavy. Be advised, we're getting reports from traffic on the ground. Braking action is now reported as poor. Repeat poor braking action on 27 right. Do you wish to divert to an alternate? Simone checked the fuel gauge. 2,400 pounds, burning 1,800 pounds per hour on one engine. That gave them maybe 45 minutes of flight time, but Philadelphia was 8 minutes away. The next nearest suitable airport was JFK 30 minutes northeast. Negative, she said into the radio. We're committed to Philadelphia. We don't have fuel for an alternate. Roger 739. Understood. Brooks looked at her, and for the first time she saw not doubt, but trust in his eyes. You've done this before, haven't you? Landed on contaminated runways, ice sand, unimproved surfaces. Simone's eyes tracked the instruments, calculating. Aircraft don't care what they land on. They only care about energy management. We have too much energy, we slide off the end. Too little, we don't make the runway. The sweet spot is about 10 knots faster than normal, with maximum aerodynamic braking after touchdown. Aerodynamic braking. Nose high after touchdown. Let the wings create drag. Only use wheel brakes when we're slow enough that they won't lock up. She glanced at him. I'll need you on the brake pedals. When I say squeeze, you squeeze gently. When I say release, you release immediately. Can you do that? Yes. No hesitation. Behind them, Paige Scott had been listening. She turned to face the cabin, seeing the doubt still written on faces, the fear that Caldwell had amplified. She made a decision. Listen to me, she said, her voice cutting through the murmurs. That woman in the cockpit just authenticated with military codes. She's been right about everything so far, the icing, the descent profile, the fuel management, and she's the only reason we're still in the air. She looked directly at Caldwell. So you can doubt her, or you can trust the Air Force base that vouched for her. Your choice. But I know who I'm trusting. At 6,000 feet, 12 miles from the runway, the second hydraulic system began its final death spiral. The gauge for System B dropped from 600 psi to 400 in the span of 30 seconds. Warning lights illuminated across the panel, amber then red. Hydraulic System B is critical. Brooks called out, his voice rising. 400 psi and falling fast. Simone's eyes flicked to the gauge, her mind running calculations. At this rate, they'd lose all hydraulic pressure in less than 5 minutes. Once it hit zero, they'd have no assisted braking, no nose wheel steering, no normal flap extension. They had to configure now, or they'd be landing with minimal control. Gear down, she commanded. Brooks's hand hesitated over the landing gear lever. But we're still 8 miles out. The drag will give us more deceleration and use the last of our hydraulics while we still have them. Do it now. Brooks pulled the gear lever. The mechanical thunk of the gear extending reverberated through the airframe. 3 green lights illuminated on the panel. Gear down 3 green, Brooks confirmed. The hydraulic gauge dropped immediately, 500 psi consumed just to extend the landing gear. System B now read 200 psi. Flaps 15, Simone said. The flaps extended with painful slowness, groaning under limited hydraulic pressure. The aircraft's nose pitched up as the drag increased. Simone pushed the yoke forward, maintaining attitude. The remaining engine spooled up to compensate for the drag burning precious fuel. Fuel quantity, 1,800 pounds. Behind them in the cabin, Gregory Caldwell had made his way back to the rear galley where he'd cornered one of the junior flight attendants, a young man named Tyler, who was barely managing his own fear. I need you to radio the FAA. Caldwell said, his voice low but insistent. That woman up there has not shown proper credentials. I don't care what some military base says civilians need civilian oversight. For all we know, she's stolen that call sign. This is a federal crime in progress. Tyler stared at him incredulous. Sir, we're 8 minutes from landing. The captain is incapacitated. She's literally the only thing that matters is following proper procedure. Caldwell's voice rose. I am a lawyer specializing in aviation law. I know the regulations. FAR Part 121 requires a qualified pilot in command, came a voice from behind them. Master Sergeant Harold Peterson stood in the aisle, his weathered face carved from stone. That's what we have. You're a passenger, Caldwell shot back. You have no authority here. Neither do you. Peterson stepped closer, and despite being 65 years old, something in his bearing made Caldwell step back. But I'll tell you what I do have. 28 years of military service. I've seen pilots operate under fire. I know what real skill looks like. And that woman up there, he pointed toward the cockpit. She's got more capability in her trembling hand than you have in your entire body. Marcus Hollis appeared emboldened by Caldwell's presence. How do we even know she's really military people lie? Stolen valor is a thing. Stolen valor? Peterson's voice dropped to something dangerous. Son, the authentication protocol we heard over the radio isn't something you fake. Military bases don't confirm call signs unless they're in the database. That means she's real. That means she's exactly who she says she is. Then why was she in economy? Bethany Sharp had joined the gathering, her phone still recording. Why does she look like she's homeless? Peterson's expression softened just slightly. Because sometimes the best people are the ones who've sacrificed everything. And sometimes they're flying commercial because they gave up their career for something more important. He looked directly at Bethany's camera. You want to keep filming, fine. But you're recording the moment when you all learned that competence doesn't announce itself. It just shows up and does the work. In the cockpit, Simone had no idea about the conflict brewing behind her. Her entire focus was on the approach. 5 miles out, altitude 3,000 feet, speed 180 knots. Flaps 25, she said. Brooks reached for the lever. It moved halfway, then stopped. The hydraulic pressure had dropped too low to fully extend the flaps. Flaps are stuck, Brooks said, his voice tight. We're getting 20, but they won't go to 25. Simone's jaw clenched. Landing flaps on a 737 were 30 degrees. They were stuck at 20. That meant higher landing speed, longer stopping distance, and more energy to dissipate on an already contaminated runway. She recalculated instantly. Landing speed would be 15 knots higher than planned. That added roughly 800 feet to their landing distance. On a 9,500-foot runway with poor braking action, they'd be using every inch. We're committed, she said. Full flaps aren't an option anymore. We land with what we have. The radio crackled. 739 heavy, you are 4 miles from the outer marker. Cleared to land, runway 27 right. Wind now 250 at 18, gusting 25. The crosswind had increased. Now coming from the left at 18 knots steady with gusts to 25. Nearly 45 degrees off the runway heading. Brooks's hands were shaking again. That's beyond crosswind limits for this aircraft. Simone's voice remained steady, almost eerily calm. Not for me. At 3 miles, Simone began the crab. She turned the aircraft 15 degrees left into the wind, letting the wind push them sideways toward the runway centerline. To anyone watching from the ground, it looked wrong, the aircraft flying at an angle, nose pointed away from the runway it was trying to reach. But the ground track was perfect, lined up directly with the center line. This doesn't look right, Brooks said, his voice tight with tension. It's not supposed to look right. It's supposed to work. Simone's eyes tracked between the instruments and the rain-obscured windscreen. At 50 feet, I'll kick out of the crab and align with the runway. You'll feel a hard rudder input. Don't fight me. Copy. 2 miles out. The runway lights appeared through the freezing rain, faint wavering but visible. Altitude 1,000 feet, Brooks called. Speed 165. Too fast. They were still carrying too much energy. Simone pulled the remaining engine to idle, letting the aircraft decelerate naturally. The descent rate increased to 1,500 feet per minute, steep, uncomfortable, but necessary. Altitude 800, speed 155. Better. Still too fast, but within the window. The runway environment came into clearer view. Red lights marking the threshold. White lights along the center line. And beyond the blue lights of emergency vehicles lining both sides, fire trucks, ambulances, crash recovery equipment. Every aircraft accident response vehicle Philadelphia owned was waiting for them. Altitude 500, speed 150. The aircraft was still crabbed 15 degrees left, the nose pointed away from the runway. To the passengers looking out the windows, it appeared they were about to land sideways. Someone screamed. Simone's voice carried over the intercom, calm and absolute. Cabin crew brace positions. All passengers, heads down, stay down. Altitude 300. Simone's hands tightened on the yoke. Her right foot hovered over the rudder pedal, waiting for the exact moment. Altitude 200. The freezing rain hammered the windscreen visibility down to half a mile. But Simone wasn't flying by what she could see. She was flying by feel by instruments, by the 10,000 hours of muscle memory that told her exactly where the aircraft was in space. Altitude 100. Now. Her right foot slammed the rudder pedal to the floor. The nose swung right violently 15 degrees in 2 seconds, aligning with the runway centerline. Simultaneously, her left hand dropped the left wing into the wind, maintaining drift correction with aileron. The aircraft was no longer crabbed. It was slipping nose aligned with the runway, but drifting left, corrected by the wing down attitude. It was a technique called wing low slip to landing, and it required absolute precision. Too much bank, and you'd drag a wingtip. Too little, and you'd drift off centerline. Simone held it perfectly. Altitude 50, speed 140. The main gear was 10 feet above the runway. Simone's hands made microscopic corrections, feeling the wind gusts through the yoke, compensating before the aircraft could react. Altitude 30. She started the flare, pulling back gently on the yoke. The descent rate bled off 1,500 feet per minute to 1,000 to 500. Altitude 20. The left main gear touched first, exactly as intended in a crosswind landing. A fraction of a second later, the right main gear contacted. The impact was firm, deliberate, unmistakable. This was not a greaser. This was a controlled crash onto a contaminated runway, using the impact to dump energy. Nose down, Simone commanded. Brooks shoved the yoke forward, slamming the nose gear onto the runway. Simone's hands flew to the throttle, pulling it to reverse thrust, but nothing happened. Reverse thrust required hydraulics they no longer had. No reversers, she said, her voice tight but controlled. Aerodynamic braking, yoke full aft. She pulled the yoke into her chest, raising the nose as high as aerodynamics allowed. The wings became massive air brakes, creating drag. The spoilers deployed automatically, one of the few systems that still had enough hydraulic pressure to function, but they were still moving too fast. Brooks brakes, gentle pressure, don't lock them up. Brooks's feet pressed the brake pedals, feeling the aircraft's wheels gripping the icy runway. The deceleration was noticeable, but not enough. Simone watched the runway markers blur past. They'd touched down in the first 1,000 feet perfect, but with 9,500 feet total and poor braking action, every foot mattered. More pressure, she said. Brooks squeezed harder. The aircraft shuddered as the wheels approached the edge of traction. Ease off, you're about to lock up. Brooks released slightly. The shuddering stopped. 6,000 feet of runway remaining. Speed 90 knots. 5,000 feet. Speed 70 knots. 4,000 feet. Speed 50 knots. The end of the runway was visible, now approaching fast. Emergency vehicles paced them along the taxiways. 3,000 feet. Speed 40 knots. Maximum braking, Simone said. Now. Brooks stomped the pedals. The anti-skid system was dead, but at this speed, it didn't matter. The tires bit into the contaminated surface, the aircraft decelerating hard enough to throw passengers forward against their seatbelts. 2,000 feet. Speed 30 knots. 1,000 feet. Speed 20 knots. 500 feet. Speed 10 knots. The aircraft rolled to a stop with 800 feet of runway remaining. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then Brooks's voice shaking with disbelief. We're down. We're actually down. Simone's hands remained on the yoke, her breathing steady, controlled. 4 counts in. 7 counts hold. 8 counts out. Yeah, she said quietly. We're down. Outside, emergency vehicles surrounded the aircraft, but there was no fire, no smoke. Just a 737 sitting on a wet runway in freezing rain with 189 people alive inside it. Against every odd, against every failure, they'd made it. The cabin door opened, and Philadelphia fire crews boarded immediately, their movements efficient and professional. They'd prepared for the worst injuries, fire structural damage. Instead, they found 189 shaken but unharmed passengers. Paige Scott stood near row 12, her legs unsteady from adrenaline crash. She'd been a flight attendant for 7 years, but she'd never experienced anything close to this. Something caught her eye, a glint of metal on the floor beneath seat 12B. She bent down and picked it up. Dog tags on a stainless steel chain, still warm as if recently worn. The stamping was clear under the cabin lights. Vaughn Simone RLT call, 05 USAF, 398 FSOPOS. Attached to the chain was something else, a small metal ribbon. Sky blue, with thin red and white stripes. Paige didn't recognize it, but Harold Peterson did the moment she held it up. He stood from his seat and crossed to her. "That's the Distinguished Flying Cross," he said quietly, his voice carrying reverence. "It's awarded for heroism or extraordinary achievement during aerial flight. You don't get that for logging hours. You get that for saving lives." Paige's hands trembled as she held the tags. These were under her seat. She must have dropped them when she ran to the cockpit. Peterson took them, gently turning them over. On the reverse side was a date and location, MED, 2023, classified. Mediterranean, 2 years ago. His eyes met Paige's. Whatever happened there, it's still classified. That means it was significant enough to keep quiet. Behind them, Gregory Caldwell had gone very still. His face had lost all color. The cockpit door opened and Simone emerged. Her gray hoodie was stained with sweat, her hair disheveled. She looked exhausted, but her eyes were clear-focused. Captain Torres followed, supported by Dr. Catherine Reed. He was conscious now, stable his chest, pain managed with nitroglycerin. But he was in no condition to command. He looked at Simone, and for a moment, emotion cracked through his professional composure. "You saved us," he said simply. "All of us." Simone shook her head. "Brooks flew that approach with me. He held it together when most people would have panicked. He deserves credit. Don't diminish what you did." Torres reached out, gripping her shoulder. "I've been flying 30 years. What you just pulled off, single-engine alternate law, contaminated runway crosswind beyond limits, that's a 1 in a million landing. Hell, it's a 1 in 10 million landing." Paige stepped forward, holding out the dog tags. "Colonel Vaughn, I think you dropped these." The cabin went silent. Simone took the tags, her expression unreadable. She didn't put them back on, just held them in her hand, the weight of them familiar, heavy with memory. Trevor Hamilton stood, his face a mask of shame. "Colonel, I owe you an apology that words can't possibly convey. You were scared," Simone interrupted quietly. "Everyone was scared. Fear makes people doubt. I get it." "That's not an excuse," Hamilton's voice broke. "I mocked you. I dismissed you based on—" He couldn't finish. "Based on what you saw instead of what I could do," Simone finished for him. "It happens." Gregory Caldwell rose from his seat, his lawyer's composure completely shattered. He opened his mouth twice before words came. "I tried to keep you from the cockpit. If I had succeeded, but you didn't." Simone's gaze was direct, unflinching. "And everyone's alive. That's what matters." "No." Caldwell's voice was firm despite his obvious distress. "What matters is that I nearly killed everyone on this aircraft because I assumed someone in worn clothes couldn't possibly be qualified. That assumption—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "That assumption could have been fatal, and I will live with that for the rest of my life." Bethany Sharp had lowered her phone for the first time since boarding. "I live-streamed everything," she said softly. "I made fun of you, called you suspicious, dangerous, And my followers, thousands of people, her voice caught. I owe you more than an apology. You owe me nothing, Simone said. But maybe think twice before judging the next person who doesn't fit your expectations. Outside emergency vehicles' lights painted the cabin in rotating red and blue. Through the windows, passengers could see news vans arriving, satellite dishes extending. This story was already going viral. Commander Dan Richardson's voice came over the radio one final time. Viper 2-1, on behalf of the United States Air Force, welcome back to the frequency. You've been missed. Simone didn't respond. She just nodded, knowing he wouldn't see it, but understanding the weight of what he'd said. She'd left the military quietly without ceremony to care for her dying mother. No one had noticed. No one had marked her departure, but they'd noticed this. Mediterranean Sea. 2 years earlier. The C-17 Globemaster shuddered violently as engine number 1 exploded, shrapnel tearing through the wing. Lieutenant Colonel Simone Vaughn was in the jump seat. She wasn't even the pilot in command, just along for the ride, ferrying between bases. But when the captain's head cracked against the side window during the explosion, when Engine 2 began flaming out 30 seconds later, instinct took over. She was in the left seat before the captain hit the floor hands on the yoke, assessing damage with the brutal efficiency that came from 10,000 hours of emergency training. Engine 3, the co-pilot screamed. We're losing three engines out of 4. The C-17 was a beast. It could theoretically fly on one engine. Theoretically. But they were loaded with medical cargo carrying wounded soldiers home. 72 tons of aircraft and one engine trying to hold it all aloft. We're not going to make it to base, Simone said, her voice preternaturally calm. Find me the nearest field, unimproved, doesn't matter. There's nothing. We're over water. Simone looked at her instruments. Altitude 8,000 feet. Distance to nearest land 40 miles. Rate of descent 1,200 feet per minute. The math was brutal. They had 6 minutes of altitude. It would take 11 minutes to reach land. Then we ditch, she said simply. But ditching a C-17 meant everyone in the cargo bay died. The wounded soldiers, the medical crew, 23 people total. Simone made a decision. She reduced power on the remaining engine to minimum thrust trading speed for glide ratio. Then she adjusted trim, finding the exact angle of attack that would stretch their glide the absolute maximum distance. 5 minutes turned into 7. 7 turned into 9. Land appeared through the windscreen, rocky, unimproved, barely more than hard-packed sand. That's not a runway, the co-pilot shouted. It is now. The landing was violent, brutal. The nose gear collapsed on impact. The fuselage dragged across rock and sand for 800 feet before coming to rest. But when the dust cleared, all 23 souls walked away. Simone was the last one out. As she jumped from the damaged cargo bay, the ejection seat damaged in the initial explosion deployed unexpectedly. The canopy fired, the rocket motor ignited, and she was slammed sideways into the fuselage before the seat could launch. Spinal compression, nerve damage, permanent tremor in her right hand. She spent 6 weeks in military hospitals. The moment she was cleared, she submitted her resignation. Her mother had been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer 2 days before the incident. The choice was clear. Marcus Hollis found Simone in the airport terminal, where she was waiting alone for ground transportation. His swagger was gone, replaced with something raw and uncomfortable, genuine shame. I grabbed you, he said, without preamble. Physically grabbed your shoulder and told you to sit down. He looked at his own hands as if seeing them for the first time. If I'd succeeded, if I'd kept you from that cockpit, you would have had to live with that, Simone finished. But you didn't. So you live with this instead, the knowledge that your assumptions nearly killed you. Let that be enough. Gregory Caldwell approached next. His expensive suit rumpled, his composure shattered. I've spent the last hour on the phone with my partners. I'm taking a leave of absence from the firm. He met her eyes. I need to figure out why I reacted the way I did, why I saw someone in old clothes and immediately assumed incompetence. That's not who I want to be. Bethany Sharp had deleted her live stream, but it was too late. The internet had already captured everything. Her followers had turned on her viciously, her brand collapsing in real time. I lost 30,000 followers in an hour, she said quietly. But that's not... She stopped, struggling. I deserved that. What I said about you, what I implied, I was cruel, and I can't take it back. No, Simone agreed. You can't. But you can choose differently next time. United Airlines Chief Operating Officer arrived at Philadelphia within 2 hours, accompanied by the company's legal team and public relations director. Colonel Vaughn, he began, United Airlines would like to offer you. I'm not interested in a job, Simone interrupted. Then what about compensation for your service today for... I don't want money. She looked at him directly. But you want to do something. Change your crew qualification procedures. Make sure that when someone says they're qualified, you have a way to verify it quickly. What happened today? The delay, the doubt that could have cost lives. The COO nodded slowly. We'll implement immediate protocol changes, and we'd like to recognize you publicly. No. The word was firm. No public recognition, no press conferences. I did what needed to be done, that's all. The FAA opened an investigation within hours, not into Simone, but into the aircraft's maintenance history and the hydraulic failures that had precipitated the emergency. But they also sent investigators to interview her to understand how a civilian passenger had ended up flying a commercial aircraft through a catastrophic emergency. Your flight status was suspended pending recertification, the lead investigator said. Technically, you weren't cleared to fly commercial aircraft. Technically, Simone replied, everyone on that aircraft would be dead if I'd followed regulations. The investigator leaned back, studying her. Off the record, you did everything right. Better than right, you did the impossible. But on the record, we have to review the decision-making process. Review away, Simone said. But while you're at it, review why a qualified pilot had to argue with passengers for the privilege of saving their lives. Within a week, the FAA would clear her of any wrongdoing and restore her flight certifications without requiring additional testing. The regulations had been followed. Emergency situations allowed for extraordinary measures. The story hit national news within 3 hours. Cell phone footage from passengers' ATC recordings, the dramatic authentication with McGuire Air Force Base, it all went viral simultaneously. Former test pilot saves 189 lives after being mocked for looking homeless. Viral video shows first-class passengers nearly preventing their own rescue. The colonel they dismissed how prejudice almost caused a tragedy. Simone refused all interview requests, all of them. But the passengers spoke. Trevor Hamilton went on morning news shows to share his story of misjudgment and redemption. Dr. Catherine Reed gave interviews about recognizing true competence. Even Harold Peterson, the retired sergeant who'd recognized Simone from the start, became a voice for looking beyond surface appearances. Within 2 months, 3 major airlines had implemented new crew emergency procedures. Protocol now included rapid verification systems for qualified passengers, secure channels to authenticate military or professional credentials, and specific training for flight attendants on how to handle passengers offering expertise during emergencies. The Vaughn Protocol. Though Simone hated the name, became industry standard. Veteran groups rallied around her story. Organizations supporting retired military personnel facing civilian prejudice found a powerful symbol in the quiet woman who'd saved lives despite being dismissed. Scholarship funds were established in her name specifically for veterans transitioning from military to civilian aviation careers. Simone declined to participate in any of it. But when a young veteran reached out privately, struggling with similar assumptions about her capabilities, Simone responded with a simple message: let them doubt, then prove them wrong by doing the impossible. It's the only language some people understand. Simone Vaughn left Philadelphia International Airport through a side entrance, avoiding the media circus at the main terminal. Her duffel bag over her shoulder, the dog tags back around her neck, but hidden beneath her hoodie, she looked exactly as she had when she'd boarded in New York, tired, worn, unremarkable. A taxi pulled up. She slid into the back seat, giving the driver an address in Baltimore. Her mother's hospice facility. She'd been on her way there when the flight diverted. As the taxi merged onto I-95, her phone buzzed. Unknown number, encrypted call indicator. She almost didn't answer, but something made her thumb accept the call. Viper 2-1. The voice was familiar. Commander Dan Richardson, but this wasn't a social call. His tone carried operational weight. We need to talk about a situation developing in the South China Sea. I'm retired, Simone said flatly. You were retired. As of 1400 hours today, your status was reactivated at the request of the Joint Chiefs. This isn't optional, Colonel. Gee. Simone closed her eyes, watching the Philadelphia skyline shrink in the taxi's rear window. 189 people owed their lives to decisions she'd made in the space of 15 minutes. And now, the military, the organization she'd walked away from to care for her dying mother, was calling in a debt she hadn't known she owed. What's the situation? She asked, her voice resigned. Classified. But it requires someone with your specific skill set, test pilot experience, combat flight hours, and the ability to make decisions under impossible circumstances. Richardson paused. The asset we need to recover has been compromised. You're the only pilot qualified to bring it back. I can't. My mother... We know about your mother, Simone. We've already arranged for her transfer to Walter Reed Medical Center, best oncology team in the country, full military benefits reinstated. Whatever she needs for as long as she needs it. It was a bribe, clean and simple. They were offering what money couldn't buy, top-tier medical care, the kind that might actually give her mother a fighting chance, in exchange for one more mission. Simone's reflection stared back at her from the taxi window. She looked like someone who'd given up everything, career, recognition, future, for family. And they were asking her to choose again. Non-negotiable, she asked quietly. Non-negotiable, Richardson confirmed. Wheels up in 36 hours. McGuire AFB. I'll have a briefing packet sent to your phone within the hour. The call ended. Simone sat in silence as the taxi drove through the night, Philadelphia's lights fading behind them. She thought about the passengers on Flight 739, about Trevor Hamilton's apologies and Gregory Caldwell's shame, about Bethany Sharp's viral videos and the sudden recognition of competence that had been invisible hours before. She thought about her mother, who'd worked 3 jobs to put her through ROTC, who'd never once complained when Simone chose dangerous assignments over safe ones. And she thought about the dog tags around her neck, the weight of them suddenly heavier than they'd been in 2 years. Her phone buzzed again. Not a call this time, an encrypted file downloading. Top secret classification. Eyes only. She opened it. The first page showed a satellite image, an aircraft she recognized immediately. Experimental. Bleeding-edge technology. And according to the briefing, it was sitting on an enemy airstrip with a crew that couldn't fly it out. They needed someone who could land anywhere, fly anything, and do the impossible under pressure. They needed Viper 21. Simone's thumb hovered over the phone screen. She could refuse, tell them to find someone else, go to her mother's bedside, and never look back. But she knew she wouldn't. Because some debts, the ones to the people who believed in you when no one else did, the ones to your country, the ones to the person you used to be, those debts never fully get paid. She closed the briefing file and made a call of her own. "Mom, it's Simone. I'm going to be a little late." The taxi drove on through the night, carrying her toward one choice while her phone pulled her toward another. Behind them, Philadelphia International Airport was returning to normal operations. Flight 739's passengers were sharing their stories, posting videos trying to make sense of the day they'd almost died because they'd judged someone by her clothes instead of her capabilities. But Simone Vaughn was already moving forward. Because that's what pilots do when the mission calls. They answer, even when the cost is everything they have left